How did you get fascinated by this industry?
So this was one industry which was a decade back very unexplored. There were very, very few restaurants. The restaurants used to run for years and years together. Nowadays, you see the turnaround is very fast.
While you are curating a fine dine experience, do Indian customers still prefer some sort of traditional aspect to be brought in?
When it comes to Chinese, they definitely want a little bit of the Indian Chinese.
Out of all the initiatives that you have built so far, which one would you say is your personal favorite?
I think it's been Kiba. That place was supposed to be jinxed and nobody was taking up that place.
What all goes into curating one fine dining entity?
To open a restaurant today, you need about 36 licenses.
So for the chefs, what is your selection criteria? How do you source your chefs?
So actually, I just look at a talent. Like if a person is committed, if a person is talented, if his hand is good, and then we train them in our own recipes.
How much of curating how the space is as important as the food itself?
So I think it is a very important part again because everyone is very conscious of what they are putting in their mouth.
Hello everyone, I'm Manswini Kaushik, and today we are delving into the interesting concept of fine dining experiences in India. India's dining out and food delivery market is projected to nearly double by the end of the decade, reaching 9 trillion rupees from 5.5 trillion rupees in 2024. While the global fine dining restaurant industry was valued at $166.86 billion in 2024, the market size of fine dining in India hasn't really been studied in depth. However, the country's broader full-service restaurant sector is projected to grow from $37.93 billion in 2025 to $64.72 billion by 2030, at a CAGR of 11.28%. Now, this upward trend is a signal for a promising future of the fine dining industry in the country. Joining us today is Neeti Goyal, a renowned restaurateur and the visionary behind Mumbai's Kaiba, Ostad, Madras Diaries, Imli's, House of Co, Amora Villas, Takumi, and several other ventures. Today, we'll explore the intricacies of building a fine dining restaurant in the culturally diverse country that is India. Thank you so much for joining us today, Neeti. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So when you first got into this space, what kind of research did you do? How did you get fascinated by this industry?
So this was one industry which was a decade back very unexplored. There were very, very few restaurants. The restaurants used to run for years and years together. Nowadays, you see the turnaround is very fast. That is because too many places are coming up. The choices are too many. So customers keep changing their preferences. So until you offer something which is completely different and completely addictive, you can't retain your customers.
Right.
So I always wanted to do places which are food centric, not bar centric. So people should come for the food, and food is my passion. It's always been my passion since I was a child.
Coming from Chandigarh.
Yeah, coming from Chandigarh, where you get fresh food, fresh ingredients. So when I came to Bombay, anyways, food was a big change because maybe of the ingredients. But I wanted to offer similar cuisines. I wanted to offer that authenticity of different cuisines, varied cuisines. India is a vast country. We have various kinds of cuisines, but you don't get everything authentic in every city. So that's an experience I wanted to bring to my customers. And that's when I met a lot of consultants from all over India. But then I thought that, maybe my mindset and theirs doesn't match. Coming from that accounting background, that banya buddhi comes in, oh, this is not setting in, that is not setting in. So once I decided on doing this cuisine, I researched for the right team, for the right recipes, and everything was put together by myself.
Out of all the initiatives that you have built so far, which one would you say is your personal favorite and has been the best, success and has brought in the best success and has brought in the most learning for you?
I think it's been Kiba.
Okay.
That's because that place was supposed to be jinxed and nobody was taking up that place.
Okay.
There used to be Olives there earlier, in 2012 that is. And post Olives shut, Olives was like, obviously it's still today the brand, which sustained so many years and everyone loves Olives. So everyone told me that if Olives couldn't manage it, how are you going to run a place there? I said, yeah, maybe that's a point. But I was in love with the place. So I'm a total animal person. And we have stables all around. So you can actually view the horses while you are dining.
Right.
And it's a very premium spot. If you see Mahalakshmi Racecourse, it's one of the
Yes.
most premium
Yes.
spots.
Yeah.
It had ample parking. It had the greenery. Especially coming from Chandigarh, I'm used to open spaces and not clustered small spaces.
Right.
So it was a huge space. So everything was a tick mark for me, except that Olives didn't work there.
Right.
So I was like, there's like, you can't compare. Obviously, Olives is up there. But I was like, I'll put in my effort. I have my own brand. I have my own ideas.
Yeah.
And then I have a racehorse by the name of Kiba, Lady Kiba. So I thought I'm going to call the place Kiba behind my racehorse. And also because we are in the racecourse.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do a Japanese fine dine. And so that's how Kiba came about. Now I decided on doing a Japanese fine dine and of course a Chinese. But how do I get the right team? Because again, it was not easy to find chefs who could do the right sushis and sashmis. So that's when my hunt began. I traveled and I got hold of two chefs, Chef Zhu and Chef Zawang, who came in, who trained my team. And that's when Kiba came about. And it's been almost 9 years now. And it's been a roller coaster journey, but not even 1 month when we've gone in the red. Touch wood for that. It's the love of customers, patrons, and all the hard work which goes in getting new menus and doing up everything, which keeps us going.
Right. So, coming to fine dining, curating fine dining experiences, what all goes into curating one fine dining entity? How long a time does it take? What all resources are required? And what's the parameter for success, so to say?
So fine dine, I feel, is an experience. You're creating an whole experience. And it is right from the time you leave your home till the time you go back. The experience doesn't end in just entering a restaurant and going out. Supposing you've had a nice meal, but while you're going back, you've had, say, a small accident or some tiff with somebody on the road, your experience is gone. So the whole experience is like a 360-degree experience. So it's every part of it is very intricately carved. So in the middle, in fact, in Kiba, we even had a tie-up with a luxury car company. And they used to pick up the guests from their home and drop them back. When you come to a restaurant, the way you are welcomed, it just sets the mood. It just sets the mood, right? So to have the right team. So one thing I keep telling my team is that you are a reflection of me. So if anyone is behaving in a certain way, it's a reflection of the whole brand, of the whole company. So they have been given rigorous trainings on, how they should be, how the customer experience should be, and how they should actually assist the customer right from ordering the right food. Now, even if you're assisted and you sit well and you get a good table, but if you don't order the right dishes because everyone has a different palate, then again, you don't have a good experience. So we tell our staff to first understand what the customer's preferences are, what are their taste buds, what are the palates, is it spicy, is it non-spicy, and likewise you make a recommendation for the dishes. And I think now the teams are excelling in doing that, and thank you to all our guests for being a part of it.
So, what is the biggest challenge that while curating these experiences that you have faced so far?
All the government agencies which come in. So to open a restaurant today, you need about 36 licenses.
Wow.
They are all very difficult to obtain. Very, very difficult because obviously the laws are very stringent. And especially after the fire, they've become very stringent. And also to keep going with that, to keep updating yourself with that is not easy. And also a lot of times, things happen like when you have, say, a bar night, something will go up and down. And these days people temperaments are call the cops. So there's always a sword hanging on the operator's head, whoever's doing the restaurant. The sword is always on our head because if something goes wrong, then obviously they'll say, show the CCTV, oh, it happened in this restaurant. And ultimately, it's our responsibility. So recently, there was a case, in fact, where there was a 27-year-old guy who drank in a restaurant, couple of drinks, and on the way back, he committed an accident.
This was in Pune, right?
It was in Bombay. I wouldn't like to take the name. But ultimately, the repercussion came on the restaurant and the restaurant was shut for serving him so many drinks. So it's a very responsible job today. And we try to check all IDs. We make sure we are serving liquor to people who are above the legal age for drinking. But I think a lot of challenges from this front. Otherwise, obviously, staff is always a challenge because we are dealing with human resource.
Exactly.
A restaurant success is mainly, on how consistent you are with your food. And to maintain that consistency, you have to maintain the team. And chef's temperaments are next level.
Yes.
So, touch
It's a
wood,
hard
I have been very, very lucky with my teams. So, whoever once comes in my company, they never leave and go.
That's
So,
great.
touch wood for that.
So for the chefs, do you what's your selection criteria? How do you source your chefs?
So actually, I just look at a talent. Like if a person is committed, if a person is talented, if his hand is good, and then we train them in our own recipes.
Okay.
So I don't like to bring in talent which is already trained because then they are not ready to learn. And they are not ready to explore, and we send them abroad to different culinary schools to get the right training, to get the right recipes. But we like people who are dedicated, who are committed, and who are eager to learn and grow.
Right. Now, coming to the fine dine, landscape, how much of curating how the space is, what kind of cutlery that's being used is as important as the food itself?
So I think it is a very important part again because everyone is very conscious of what they are putting in their mouth.
Yeah.
So if it is even a spoon, it has to be a proper spoon. Nobody wants any plastic near them.
Right.
So even if it is a fast food like a Madras Dairy or an Imli, we make sure we use bamboo plates, we use wooden cutlery. So that's something organic which people like to use. When it comes to fine dine restaurants, nowadays everything has to be proper, up to the T out there. So there are enough companies who are indigenous also who are making now, but earlier we used to all import it from Britain.
Right. While you are kind of building a, fine dine restaurant, what are the things that one should definitely keep in mind while establishing it, and how long does it take to kind of formalize it and start running up?
So it's not easy to start a fine dine restaurant. First of all, you need to be at the right location because you need to see who your customers are and are you at the right location. Then you also need to see that you are making the choice of the right cuisine. So if I say South Bombay and if I'm doing a hardcore seafood place, it's never going to work because most of the audience is vegetarian. So you have to be at the right location with the right concept. The right timing is very important. Restaurant has a lot of seasons, ups and downs, summer season, monsoon season. So you have to open at the right time. So the timing is extremely important and the right decision of the right team. So a lot of times we just fill in jobs for the sake of filling the position.
Okay.
But I never do that. I would rather leave that position empty than filling it up just to fill it. So if I'm not finding a right bar manager, I would rather leave that position empty than filling it with somebody else because then your work gets hampered even more. And the search ends and you try to compromise when things are not going to work. And ultimately, within a span of 2-3 months, is anyways going to fall back on you.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we always make a mistake. And the third is we feel that what we like, people are going to like. That's not true. Everyone has different preferences. So we need to first survey the market around us. We need to survey what kind of people we are going to be serving. What are their likes and preferences? And once we do so, a lot of research has to go on paper before you actually start to open. So what's happening nowadays is you have a lot of inflow of youngsters who are just wanting to open restaurants, mostly bars.
Yeah.
But why are they shutting? That's because no research is going into it. Why am I as a customer going to go to a bar? Like what is in it for me? Something different has to be offered. So a lot of things are there, I think, which go into making a fine dine restaurant.
Right. Fine dining and hospitality per se, there's a lot of subjectivity that comes in because obviously we are dealing with people's reactions. Like you rightly said, that there's a whole sort of mix that goes into dealing with how a customer should be interacted with. But fine dining and exclusivity and luxury is very subjective. So how does one unify that in one platform, right? And what are the, how do we qualify a fine dine as this is one of a kind experience. It can't be like a daily activity.
So one golden rule of hospitality, customer is always right.
Yeah.
No matter what, I've told my staff never to argue because what happens in a fine dine is it's a lot of word of mouth.
Yeah.
You can open a very, very fancy place, but you could go empty. So in a fine dine restaurant, you are targeting a very, very niche kind of audience, which is very limited as well. So you want to reach out to that audience. And once you have a bad word about it or something that's not right, can really go against you. So you have to be very, very careful on every single customer that walks into your restaurant, right from serving them to agreeing to their right to trying to do damage control. So there are times when some mess up happens in the kitchen and a wrong dish is served on the table and the customer is really furious. So you should know how to tackle these situations, how to, make it happen. So now we have customers who have parties, who have their engagements, who have their 25th anniversaries, who have their Sangeet functions. They don't even fix the menu. They trust us so much that they just come and say that, you know what, our party this date, do the best. And then actually the onus is more on us to perform even better.
Yeah.
So if they would have fixed a menu, maybe they would have got like this much. But if they're not fixing it, we're giving this much. Right. So that's the trust that you need to build. So I think success of fine dine is trust building, trust building in the customer. So again, like a lot of people who are vegetarians, who are Jains, they don't like a common kitchen, like especially when you're using seafood and all of those. So I make sure that our kitchens are separate, the veg and the non-veg kitchen. So this is all trust building. Customers know that we go there, our food is not going to be mixed with non-veg in the same kadai or, the same pan for that matter. So all these things go a long way in success of a restaurant.
Yeah, yeah. And who, according to you today, see, Mumbai is a very competitive market.
Yeah.
For sure. But who would you say should consider opening a restaurant today, a fine dine restaurant today, if they want to?
Well, I wouldn't want to advise anyone to do that. It's a very tough job. I'm sure people are happy what they're doing and they should remain happy. Why they want to take that stress? It's not an easy job at all. It's 24/7. Wow. So there are no working hours for us. Yes. In fact, everyone's resting on a Sunday and Sundays are the busiest days for us.
Yes.
And there were times when I was getting very little time for my family. And that's when I decided that, you know what, I need to put a full stop to some kind of timings. My phone is always on. Almost till 3 or 4 in the morning, I get work calls. So there are no working hours. There are no weekends. In fact, Monday is our Sunday. So when everyone's off to work, Monday blues and all, it's Sunday for us. And we are nicely sleeping. So I wouldn't want to say that somebody should open a restaurant. It's up to them. If they want to get into this roller coaster, more than welcome.
So, no, but in Mumbai per se, there's so much competition. So how do you deal with the competition? How do you deal with the, entire matrix of Mumbai restaurants?
I look at competition very positively because only when people experience different restaurants will they come back to us for the experience that we offer. If there was no competition, there's no fun. So only when there's competition, we know that and also it keeps us on our toes. Yeah. We need to up our game constantly, do something to retain our customers, to offer something new. So I think competition is healthy.
Right. And what kind of mindset should one person have to kind of open in Mumbai as compared to the rest of the country?
I think a lot of patience, perseverance. These two qualities are a must if you want to open a restaurant. You cannot be in a hurry because if you take a wrong decision, you're going to fail because chances of failure are almost 70%.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel in Mumbai per se, the dynamics work a little different? I'm hypothesizing, but is it true that, in Mumbai, it's more of like an aspirational crowd that goes into the fine dining experiences as compared to the HNIs? Is that something that you see? Is that true?
No, I feel in Mumbai, people are very well traveled. They've traveled all across the globe. They've tasted all the cuisines. They know what quality ingredients mean. Fine dine restaurant, if you're doing, you have to have the right ingredients to get the right recipe. So I think people really appreciate places which are offering those right ingredients and they are ready to pay a good price also if they are getting that quality. And I think that evolvement has come in Mumbai, not in the smaller tier 2 cities, because people are well traveled even there. Yeah. But still people are very price sensitive. But in Mumbai, people are not price sensitive, whether it's HNIs, whether it's your premium dining crowd, they want to pay for that experience. And then you need to offer that experience.
So to open a restaurant in Mumbai, does it require substantially more money as compared to the rest of the India? Is that true?
It requires a lot of guts.
Plus money, right?
Plus money, of course. Like earlier, you could open a restaurant in about, say, 1 crore. I'm talking about a small size, like a 75-80 seater. Now, if you want to do a similar restaurant, there's nothing less than 5 crores that you can do because the deposits are higher, the license fees are higher, the rents are higher, your operating costs are higher, working capital takes a long time. So the cost has gone up very much.
Yeah. What sort of cities would you suggest someone if someone is looking to kind of build a restaurant? Because building a restaurant is a rather dream for a lot of people.
Yeah.
We when we are younger, we just like want to retire by having a restaurant by the ocean, right? So, what kind of cities do you feel that someone exploring to open a restaurant should explore in India today?
So I think it totally depends on the person who's opening it. So a person who's a very laid back person will be very happy doing a restaurant in Goa because that will suit their lifestyle, and they would be able to do justice to that restaurant. Make that kind of a place a lazy place by the beach where people are chilling, and you'll enjoy doing that work. A person who likes a busy life, definitely a tier 2 city. That's because the competition is lower, and the capital cost will be much lower, the operating cost will be much lower. And that's when, lastly, is the metro cities. I would say you should enter in the end once you have an experience in tier 2 cities, so that your capital costs are higher, your expenses are higher, you have an experience of what you're doing, and then you come into the mainstream.
So, what tier 2 cities would you say are going to see the biggest?
So Indore, Pune, Chandigarh, all these cities are booming, in fact.
Which cities would you say are going to, give a direct competition to Mumbai as compared to fine dining? There hasn't been as yet.
I think Bangalore is giving a very tough competition, and Delhi tops the chart because Delhi has the most fabulous restaurants. And one reason for it is, again, it's North India. Weather is good, so you get very, very good vegetables. In fact, I must share this with you. So I have a brand called Imli, which is street food from all over India.
Yeah.
And in that, we had to make the aloo tikki, Meerut ka aloo tikki. We tried, it wasn't coming crispy. Then I said, there's something definitely wrong with it. Then I took the potato in my husband's lab, pharma lab.
Wow,
And I said, I want to do a test on it. So the starch content in the potato, which you get from Nasik, is much different than what you get in Delhi.
Oh.
And that's when I realized that's why it's not coming crispy. So we started getting our potatoes from Delhi for the special dish because the content of the starch was different. So that's exactly what I'm trying to say. When your ingredients are right, like the atta, the wheat that you get on north side or in Punjab is very different. So you can never recreate those same kulchas which you get in Amritsar in Mumbai. So even if a Mumbai person is from Amritsar, they will still miss those kulchas back home.
Yeah.
So I think a lot depends on the quality of the ingredients, the availability of the ingredients. But Delhi definitely tops the charts.
Yeah. India's luxury landscape and India's fine dining landscape is ever evolving. There's one thing that is trending today, and then there's another which will trend tomorrow. How do you stay relevant? What are the key parameters for someone to stay relevant across India?
This is a very important question. Earlier, nobody used to think of a boardroom in a hospitality industry. Now, I think these boardroom meetings are extremely essential to stay relevant, to know about the new trends, to know about what's going to happen, what are people's preferences, what are they changing. So now a lot of people are moving towards healthy food.
Yes.
Even when they come for an Asian, they don't want anything which is even pan-fried.
Right.
They want everything which is steamed, like a steamed edamame. So you have to constantly evolve yourself. If you want to sustain your place, you have to constantly create recipes, constantly evolve according to the customer preferences, likes, according to the changes, according even to the age group. A lot of age group earlier which were not going to restaurants. Today you'll see a 13-year-old going with a whole group of friends to a restaurant, which earlier was unheard of. Right. So you have to cater to all kind of audiences. So I think these boardroom meetings are extremely important in the hospitality industry as well to stay relevant.
And do you see that seeping into the tier 2 cities as well? Or is it just
tier 2 cities, of course, everywhere. People are health conscious. People are conscious of what they are eating. A lot of these diseases, cancer and all these diseases we don't even know where they're coming from. It's probably what we eat. So everyone is conscious. And I think that is something which is constant. If you want to stay relevant, if you want to stay up there, you have to evolve.
Yeah. And while you are curating a fine dine experience, do Indian customers still prefer some sort of traditional aspect to be brought in, or do they want like complete authenticity?
So it's debatable. But I feel that when it comes to Chinese, they definitely want a little bit of the Indian Chinese. And in fact, if you see all the NRIs which come into India, they just want to eat Indian Chinese. So that's something which is not going to change. But there are some cuisines which people want authentic. So if you look at a Mexican, they want authentic. If you look at Italian, definitely they want authentic. If you look at many other cuisines, they want authentic, but some they definitely want the Indian palate to be.
Yeah. Have you seen any restaurant that has been extremely authentic fail just because they have been very authentic and very culturally relevant to the, maybe let's say Japan or China?
Many, in fact, many, because sometimes what happens, you're doing a certain cuisine and the cuisine is very bland. And obviously, you have to be according to your cuisine, right? But the Indian palate is not bland at all. We like little spicy masalas or however, like flavors basically in the food. And when the flavors are missing, then people don't feel that it's a great experience. So there are many restaurants which have actually not done well because of that.
This is a trend that is Mumbai specific, you're saying, or that happens pan India?
I think pan India.
Okay. So, what have you seen? Let's compare it from 10 years ago to today. How big of an influence does social media have in a success of a fine dine restaurant?
I think it has a huge hand in the success of a fine dine because when I started my restaurants, there was barely any Instagram. I think it came post that actually. And a good restaurant was, you are serving good food. There's no social media, no fans, and people are just coming in. They like the food. In fact, there was barely any reservation apps also. You just call the restaurant or you just wait for a table. And I think I liked that because it was a very nice, sweet way of, coming out, waiting for a table. And we used to have queues of people nicely waiting outside, chatting. And nowadays, everything is social media. I mean to say, who's tagging, how many tags, how many reshares, how many stories, make these reels, then get those influencers. It's a whole market, it's a whole industry which has come about actually from hospitality being one chain of it. And a restaurant can't survive without social media because until you are seen, until you are posted about, you're talked about, people think you're not there.
So, does that, apply to fine dine as well?
It definitely does because there are a lot of people who influence people, their decisions on going out. And when they start posting their experiences, whether it's good or bad, it does affect a person's mindset on whether they want to go to a certain place. So it matters in a fine dine restaurant also about what you're being posted. Are you being talked about on social media? And especially if you're a fine dine restaurant, then you'll expect celebs to come or some other kind of people to come who are papped. And then when you're papped, you're seen over the place. That helps you boost your sales.
Right. So let's take a hypothetical kind of a situation. One has to open a restaurant in Mumbai and one has to open in Indore. What are the marketing strategies or tips that you'd like to give that should be different in these two, cities?
The restaurant is open or it's going to open?
It's open now. So how does one market differently in these two?
So in Indore, I would rather get in touch with somebody local and try to host a few people. Say a couple of, say one whole week, you host people who dine regularly, who eat out, who influence people, who know, everyone around. Since it's a small city, you can reach out by word of mouth. And when people try your food, then they say, oh, the food is very good, the experience is very good, and they want to come back. So I would not rely so much on social media in a city like Indore, rather rely on word of mouth, rather rely on creating real experiences, on inviting people, hosting a few tables every day, maybe for 2 weeks, and creating that buzz, with that. And it's a small city, so news spreads very fast. But if it's Mumbai, which is huge, definitely you need to take help of social media. So you need to get the big food bloggers. You need to get the influencers. You definitely need to host your friends. You definitely need to call all the people who are related to the industry to talk about you. You need to do some media around your new openings. So there's so much going around what's new in Bombay. You need to do your BT. It's a whole chain.
So let's say an HNI from Chandigarh to compare to an HNI from Mumbai. Is there a difference of approach towards food that you see? Because you've sailed in both boats.
Yeah.
So is there a difference in approach to food?
HNI in Chandigarh and Mumbai is not much different. because they are of a certain mindset. And they obviously always, if they're going out for an experience, it's about entertaining somebody, entertaining a client. So they want to go to the best of places. They are happy to spend. They are ready to pay for that experience. So I think comparing an HNI in a tier 2 or in a bigger city is like similar, because they also expect similar kind of experience.
Is kind of Mumbai or tier 1 cities looked up to by tier 2 city?
Definitely. So if a brand from Mumbai is going into a smaller city, it's very looked up. Oh, you know what? This brand has opened up. So like how we opened up Imli in Nagpur.
Yeah.
So everyone talks that, oh, from Bombay, Imli is into Nagpur now. So it definitely adds up. It definitely gives you that one level up right there.
Nudge.
Yeah.
Kind of. Along with having opened so many restaurants and being in this industry for so long, you have also had a lot to do in the social sector, and you have a lot of philanthropic work. So could you talk about that?
Yeah, so actually, I am a restaurateur by choice and a philanthropist by accident, I'll tell you. So, in the pandemic, what happened? Me and my daughter were going to buy some medicines just before the lockdown had started, and we saw some children eat mud. And I thought they're playing. Why would they eat mud? There was no lockdown that was announced. This is 3-4 days before the lockdown. And my daughter said, let's go and, talk to them. When we went, they said they haven't eaten for 2 days and that's why they're eating mud. So we realized that they were children of daily wage workers who have no savings and they had no food. So I immediately told my daughter, I said, let's make some food from the restaurants and let's go out and give it. So she's also done her hospitality from La Roche in Switzerland and now she's joined me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we did that. We went out with 1,200 meals. And even if we had done 12,000, it would have been less. There were people running behind our vehicle waiting for, just one box of food. And that's when I founded an initiative called Khana Chahiye. In that, by the end of the pandemic, we had distributed 80 lakh free meals, 60,000 ration kits. We adopted 32 orphanages, 800 sex workers, and the work is still going on. So once this started, I realized that, maybe God was preparing me to be a restaurateur for a bigger cause, because I had empty restaurant capacities. I had kitchens which were empty. I had staff which was empty, which I could use to make meals for the needy. And I had the resources where I could source the packing materials and all. Even everything was shut. The godams are shut. The stores are shut. Where do you buy so much packing material? I had contacts with farmers from Nasik and Pune where we could source the ingredients directly. So that reduced our cost as well. So I was just feeling that time, I just gave myself to I think the people, and I was like, maybe God was preparing me for a bigger task, and that's why I got into the restaurant industry. I was really taken up by seeing the pain and seeing the agony of people, and that's the time I realized what really feeding people means. Feeding people is not in good times, it's even feeding them in bad times. Whether you're charging them or you're not charging them is immaterial. It's about feeding somebody. And you won't believe it, all my guests from all the restaurants used to come and they used to drop bags and bags of ration, of Horlicks, of biscuits. And they were like, since you are doing this, we want to donate. Now, where do we donate? Because obviously you can't donate like a bori full of things, right? I mean to say, if you see my restaurant Kiba, I had like mountains of ration there. I didn't know how to sort it because there was so much material. So that's how people opened their homes. They came about. And that's when during this, I founded the Ghar Bhejo campaign with Sonu Sood, where we migrated 1.5 lakh migrant workers back home. That was also an amazing campaign. Post that, I started a campaign called Nari Niti. So I honestly believe that women are already empowered, whether it's in the cities or it's in the villages or absolute rural areas. They just need to be given the opportunities.
Right.
And once they are given the opportunities, they can transform a whole system of their family.
Right.
So that's when we decided that let's provide these opportunities to women. So we started working in MP, in UP, in West Bengal. So in UP, we gave them a lot of carts. And on those carts, they sell pani puri. Some people make eggs and they sell. We gave a lot of sewing machines. We got them orders from ISKCON so they can stitch and they can make a living. Similarly, one project which is very close to my heart is the Tiger Widow projects in Sundarbans. So Sundarbans is an area with 45 islands on the Indian continent, and there are 3,000 tiger widows. Do you know who tiger widows are?
No.
They are women whose husbands have been mauled and eaten by tigers. And they are tribal women. They are not ready to leave those villages. There is absolutely no income for them because there is no industry there. The water is saline. There is no agriculture. And they have no living. So that's when I thought what to do. Like, they are not ready to shift because for them it's their land. They're not going to leave it even though their husbands have gone. In fact, there was a lady who I met. I'll show you her video. Her husband was eaten by a tiger. Her son was eaten by a tiger. Daughter was eaten by a crocodile.
God.
And she was still surviving. That's when we sent our teams, we researched on how we can help these women, and we came upon an idea that maybe we should make them independent entrepreneurs. And that's when we thought we'll make them do fish rearing, goat rearing, and they can multiply those and sell.
Yeah.
So we actually got them to learn how to, do fish farming, goat rearing. Then we donated those fish and goats to them. So now they all have their homes. They are multiplying their fishes, their goats, and they are all living a nice life. So till now, I've touched about 500 tiger widows, and my project is still on.
Wow.
And recently, they have found a very ancient 5,000-year-old temple in one of the islands, and there's a huge rush of tourists there. So these ladies have reached out to me, कि madam हमारा restaurant खुलवा दो. So I said, restaurant? I was like, how sweet is that? So I thought maybe, I'll take up a small stall for them there.
Yeah.
And they can do these chai pakoras. And they are very good in some Bengali dishes.
Yeah.
So I told them that make a group of like 10 ladies and then you come back to me. So in one day, they were all with all the data, with everything, they're ready. So they're damn fast. So women are always eager. You only need to give them the opportunities. And that's what we are trying to do to make a change. So now that has kind of changed my mindset a lot.
So having worked across so many restaurants, what's your biggest learning about this industry?
I think a restaurant industry is like a handful of sand in your hands. The minute you leave it, it's going to just flow off. So you have to have a hold on all your establishments until you do that. And if you're going to leave it, for it to happen on an auto mode, it's never going to work. It's never worked for anyone, I think. So until you have a strong hold on all your establishments, that's the key to success.
Before we wrap up, I have one final very interesting question.
Sure.
What is your favorite dish across all your restaurants, and which one has been most kind of accepted one?
So we have a particular noodle, which is a pan-fried noodle. It's a very common dish, but the way we make it, it's steamed, it's not fried, and then the vegetables are tossed in black pepper, which is hand grounded again, and all the sauces are made in-house. We don't buy any sauces, and the way it comes up as a complete dish, with vegetables, with the right amount of little bit of carbs. The noodles are like, you have to find the noodles in the vegetables. So I think that's one of my favorite dishes since the last decade.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you.
Great. This has been a lovely conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And, it's always a dream to one day own a restaurant. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast and kind of speaking to us. And it was a very insightful conversation. I wish you all the best for all your endeavors, and especially the philanthropic work.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure. And I wish a lot of success to all the upcoming restaurateurs who are wanting to do restaurants. All wishing them all the very best and success in whatever venture they do.
Yeah, great.
Thank you
so much. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.